do I want to go and have some difficult conversation with someone like day to day, like in my personal life? No, like, if someone's gotten a point of view that I'm like not just a degree off of, but I'm majorly off of, I'm much more likely to be like, I'm not going to fucking, I don't even want to get into this with this person. So I'm not encouraging anyone, including myself, to go on like, go and have hard conversations. But I also, it's like, I do think it's like very cynical to only stick to our own mindset, our own little echo chamber, and then attack anyone who's like a degree off or totally 180 off. There's got to be some space where we're coming together and we can tussle with ideas and we can have those moments to convince each other or open up our thinking. Because I know my thinking has been opened up by a lot of things. Some of them were like terrible life events that happened, and some of them were just someone like giving me an offhand comment that I took hard, but then I thought about afterwards, and I was like, oh, actually, that was like really good feedback. And that value of just not going out and feeling you have to have every single tough conversation all the time, and especially not on the internet, which I think is just the worst place to talk about anything, but just maintaining that willingness to have the right conversations at the right time with the right people as they come up. I think it's a super important thing because like I just feel like there's so many things where the potential, if we ignore it and we just stay in our camps, it's going to spiral off into something like I think of things like housing, like the housing crisis and all that. Unless people have conversations, that's just going to get manifestly worse very, very quickly. Housing, the mental health and addiction services, anything like justice reform, any of these types of things, unless we do something about it, and that doing something about it has to incorporate some kind of conversation with people who have views that we think are objectionable. So I don't want to waggle my finger at anyone and be like, well, you're not doing it right. But at the same time, it's like, we can't just hide in our corners because that seems so cynical and so like in an odd way, it's kind of like giving up.
Yeah, I have personally benefited from, like friends who have been like, "Well, let me challenge you on that view." And those conversations. So it's always, about, where your battery is. And, sometimes people are conflict avoidant, but I think an important thing is, sometimes people are just like thrust into having to think and deal about these things. Because it's happening. So for instance, I didn't grow up in a neighborhood that was overly policed. I didn't ever have to like think I could just completely ignore like the terrible things in the criminal justice system. But a lot of people grow up without that sort of privilege of being able to do that. And they have to talk about it because it is their reality. But so I think it's always sort of personal because sometimes I'm in a mood and I'm just like, no, what you said is bullshit. Let's talk about it. Sometimes I'm just like, okay, cool. And I think it's always good to sort of check in with yourself. Like I have spent like a lot of time, especially in the last year, like thinking about like how I approach conflict. Because my job is conflict, right? Like I am like a trial attorney. It is conflict with often high stakes. So I find myself a lot coming home and just wanting to shut down and like try to like decrease the stress. And that's also not healthy, right? So like I've spent like a lot of time in therapy, sort of like trying to be like, well, how do I not be so affected by the conflict of my job to the point where I can not necessarily have conflict, but like stand up for my own viewpoints and like personal relationships and things like that. And it's hard. It's always, like a back and forth where I'm never really sure, like, am I being an asshole? Or am I being um making someone think? I honestly don't know the answer.
I don't think it's an answer thing. Like because the nature of your job is conflict, both in your current role and your last role, and also you like grew up playing in punk bands and all that. Like I don't have an answer. You don't have an answer. I don't think anyone does, but I do think that there is a lot of value in discussing, at least keeping in the conversation, the importance of like being willing to at least talk with people who have different ideas. And like I really 100% believe if I'm only hanging out with people and speaking with people who believe the same things that I believe, I'm doing a disservice to the things that I believe because I'm just like kind of hiding in my little pocket. I'm also not an activist at this point in my life. Like I'm like, I run a business, I do a podcast, I have a family. But I really think if I take my ideas seriously, like and I'm interested in other people adopting them, then there's got to be some degree of conversation with other people where everyone just doesn't agree because everyone just agrees and we could, let's just watch a soccer game and not talk about ideas. Like there's no point, right?
Yeah. And listen, life's hard. These conversations are hard. And I think we're allowed to give ourselves some break from it. But that doesn't mean like full abdication. Especially, when, we see someone that like we are close with um doing something we think is in like opposition to our values or things like that. I think like we have an obligation because we are the people that are supposed to have that like serious conversation and sort of challenge each other, even within our own social group. But I mean, I think just beyond that, it's just we live in a world like we don't live in like our Twitter bubble. Like that's not actually real life. So like we need to like actually have skills on how to communicate with folks, if especially if we're going to achieve some sort of like liberatory strategy. It's not just going to be because the might of position political ideology X on Twitter is so strong that this is what happens. Like, it actually like requires like transforming like maybe like people's core fundamental beliefs and outlooks and relationships. Like, to achieve a better society for animals, like we do have to challenge like people's upbringing, so like how they grew up and their relationships with animals. And I think recently a report came out that says factory farming has exploded in the United States, has gotten bigger and bigger every year. And I think that's an overall indictment on the failures of the animal rights movement, right? Where like that should be like really startling, which is like, oh, like this is, not only have we not stopped it, but it's become worse. um so I think like we need to recognize like if we actually want the values that we believe in to transform society, we have to go beyond our bubbles and we have to put ourselves in uncomfortable positions. And also open ourselves up to be changed as well. It's not like a one-way street. I've certainly had like really strong opinions on things and it's been like, well, actually like, maybe I'm wrong. And I think people need to sort of accept the humility that maybe they're wrong about some things. Um,
That's tough, man, especially in today's age. I want to hit on something you said though, that just like when I think about people staying in their bubbles, the thing that always freaks me out about that idea is the other bubble is probably populated with people who've got the power to make change. And they might actually have a totally different opinion than me, but they're surrounded by only people that will encourage them to stay the same. And there's nobody with a counter opinion around them. And it's like, again, I really don't want to come across as someone waggling their finger at everyone, like, go out, talk to your racist uncle. Like, people got to do what they want to do in their lives. But I just feel like there's so many people who've got the ability to make things happen, who have so much power, so much influence. Like they control budgets, they control policies, they control these things, and they are surrounded by their own bubble of people, like-minded people. And I feel like if you want to affect change on a small level or a big level, you've got to be in the conversation with people. You've got to at least been the person who said something that sticks in the mind of someone who's a decision maker, who has power. Because I don't have any ability to change how someone, let's say, interacts with animal welfare outside of just myself day to day and my family, unless I'm out there talking about things like I'm writing songs, I'm talking to people, I'm doing a podcast like this. You got to put yourself in the conversation and put yourself in the conversation where someone who's got an opposing view is at least willing to consider what you're saying. They might think you're full of shit, but they're at least willing to hear it. And that's what my fear of the bubbles is that we're not getting to the people who have power and influence.